I wasn't always this man, sitting alone in my basement gym, every creak of the clock like a hammer against my temple. I used to be content. My name is John, and I was your average husband, if there is such a thing. I was married to a beautiful woman, Gloria. She was smart, elegant, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We had a comfortable life. I worked as a financial analyst, crunching numbers and managing portfolios for some of the wealthiest clients in the city. Gloria, on the other hand, was an art teacher who had this artistic flair that added a sense of vibrancy to everything around her. I thought we were happy. Isn't that what everyone in love tells themselves? But love, it turns out, is like a well-worn suit. You don't notice the frayed edges until you're already out the door. Our marriage had been good, or so I thought. Gloria and I had been together for nearly 10 years, the last 5 of which had been a little less than ideal. The spark that once burned bright was now a dying ember. But I still loved her, I think. I still woke up every morning and made her coffee just the way she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. I still kissed her goodbye on my way to the office, still tried to listen to her stories about her students and her latest projects. It's funny, isn't it? How we hold on to these small things, believing they're enough to hold a marriage together. But Gloria, she was distant. Not at first. It started gradually, like a slow drip from a leaky faucet. She'd come home later than usual, with vague excuses that didn't quite sit right. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now never left her side. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh it off, telling me I was being paranoid. "It's just work," she'd say, her voice a little too high, her smile a little too wide. But there were moments, those fleeting moments where I'd catch her staring off into space, her fingers nervously twisting the silver ring on her finger. A ring I'd put there all those years ago, promising her the world. I thought maybe it was just a rough patch, maybe she was stressed. But then there were the nights when she'd stay late at the art studio, saying she needed to prepare for an exhibit, or that she was helping one of her students. I tried to believe her. I wanted to believe her. But a little voice in the back of my mind kept nagging at me, whispering that something was wrong. I'm not the kind of guy who snoops around, but curiosity can be a dangerous thing. One night, Gloria came home late, again. She looked flushed, her cheeks a little too pink, her eyes too bright. I asked her how her night was, and she mumbled something about a late session, quickly darting upstairs. She left her phone on the counter. I stared at it, my hands twitching, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. I had no right, I told myself. But still, her phone was unlocked. I tapped on the message icon. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, just messages from friends, her students, her mother. But then I saw it, a name that didn't belong. Brad, just Brad. No last name, no contact photo, a simple, unassuming name that felt like a cold knife slicing through my chest. I opened the thread. Most of it was innocuous, talks about art, music, shared jokes. But the frequency of the messages, the little hearts and winks. I felt something dark take root in my gut. I closed the phone and placed it back exactly where she left it, feeling like I'd just looked into Pandora's box. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this Brad guy was just a friend, an art colleague. But then again, Gloria had never mentioned him before. Not once. I tried to push it to the back of my mind, but it was like a splinter that refused to leave. At dinner the next night, I casually asked her about her day, waiting for her to slip, to say his name. She didn't. I asked her about her new projects, about any new colleagues or friends she'd made. Her face was perfectly composed, her answers rehearsed. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. And that made me feel worse. Because that's when I realized she was hiding something, and hiding it well. A few days later, I met Seymour. I was at the gym, trying to burn off the anger that was building inside me. Seymour was a regular there, an old-timer who'd seen his fair share of life's ups and downs. We got to talking, and before I knew it, I was spilling my guts out to him. He listened quietly, his face lined with years of wisdom. And when I finished, he just looked at me and said, "You know, John, we're just two fools who let our wives cheat on them." His words hit me like a truck. I didn't know if Gloria was cheating, not for sure. But Seymour's bluntness made me realize that I couldn't sit around waiting. If there was something going on, I needed to know. And I needed to act. That's when I decided to follow her. I still remember the night I decided to follow her. I'd wrestled with it. For days, trying to convince myself I was being ridiculous. But every time she smiled at me, that smile that now seemed more forced than genuine, I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. It was a Friday evening, and Gloria had told me she'd be late again, something about a gallery event downtown. I didn't argue, didn't press. I just nodded and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, watching as she walked out the door, dressed to the nines in a little black dress I hadn't seen in years. She looked stunning. It twisted the knife a little deeper. The moment the door closed, I grabbed my jacket and car keys. I waited for a few minutes, just enough time for her to drive off, then I followed. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I felt like some kind of stalker, a private eye in my own marriage. I kept my distance, careful not to get too close. She drove with purpose, no hesitation, no sign of the confusion I was feeling. She didn't head downtown. Instead, she drove across town to a quieter part of the city, where the streets were narrow and the lights dimmed the further she went. Finally, she pulled into a parking lot next to a small, upscale restaurant. Not the kind of place for a gallery event, I noted bitterly. I parked a few cars down and watched as she got out, smoothing down her dress, checking her reflection in the car window. She looked excited, happy. And then I saw him. A man walked out of the restaurant, tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that immediately grated on my nerves. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, the kind that looked like it cost more than I made in a month. He walked right up to her, and she smiled at him, that same smile that used to be just for me. She reached out and touched his arm, and he leaned in, pressing his lips to her cheek in a way that was far too familiar. Brad. It had to be Brad. I felt my stomach twist, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I wanted to storm over there, to demand answers, to punch that smile right off his face. But I stayed put, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I watched as they went inside together, his hand on the small of her back, guiding her like they were already a couple, like they belonged together. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, my mind racing. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that maybe it was just a work dinner, a friendly meetup. But I knew better. There was something between them, something that felt like betrayal. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I couldn't take it. I got out of the car and walked across the street, keeping to the shadows. I found a window near the side of the restaurant and looked in. There they were, sitting at a corner table, leaning in close, their heads almost touching. Gloria was laughing, her hand on his arm. Brad was smiling, that smug grin plastered on his face. And then I saw it, her hand sliding over his fingers wrapping around hers. She looked at him the way she used to look at me, with a softness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, a rage I had never felt before. I wanted to smash that window, to scream, to make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, my hand trembling. I needed proof. I needed to know that this wasn't just some paranoid fantasy, that I wasn't imagining things. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, Brad leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick peck on the cheek, but a slow, deliberate kiss that spoke of intimacy. of passion. And Gloria, she didn't pull away. She kissed him back, her hand moving to his neck, pulling him closer. I felt my knees buckle, the air leaving my lungs. There it was, the cold, hard truth. My wife was cheating on me, right there in front of my eyes. All the doubts, the suspicions, the late nights. It all made sense now. The world around me seemed to spin, my vision blurring as the reality of it hit me like a freight train. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a curb. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I just knew I couldn't stand there and watch anymore. I turned and walked back to my car, my body on autopilot, my mind numb. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at nothing, my phone still clutched in my hand. I thought about Seymour's words, his blunt honesty. He was right. I was a fool. But I wasn't going to stay one, not anymore. I needed a plan. I needed to act. And so I drove home, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts, a plan already forming in the back of my mind. If Gloria thought she could play me for a fool, she had another thing coming. This was just the beginning. The drive home was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from spinning out of control. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. Gloria's lips on his, the look in her eyes, the way she leaned into him as if she'd been doing it for years. I felt sick, the bile rising in my throat. My mind was running 100 miles a minute, swinging from rage to despair to a numb kind of calm. I knew I had to act. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. Seymour's words echoed in my head again, his grizzled face coming to mind. He'd been right about me being a fool, but he'd also shown me that I didn't have to stay one. I could do something about it. I parked the car in the driveway and sat there, staring at the dark house, Gloria's car absent from the garage. She wouldn't be back for hours, I was sure of that. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't judge me, who could help me think straight. And that's when it hit me. Alyssa. I'd met Alyssa a few weeks back at the gym, introduced by Seymour, who'd described her as a woman who knows her way around a mess. She was sharp, with a quick wit and a smile that could cut glass. She also happened to be Brad's sister, something I'd learned only after a few friendly conversations. I remembered how she had mentioned, almost in passing, that she didn't think too highly of her brother's taste in women and how she'd rolled her eyes when she said it. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was everything. Either way, I needed to find out. I dialed her number before I could second-guess myself. She picked up on the second ring. John? Her voice was surprised but not unfriendly. What's up? I hesitated for a moment, not sure how to start. I need to talk to you. It's about Gloria. And your brother. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear her thinking. I'll be at the Blue Note in 15, she said finally, her voice serious. Meet me there. I agreed and hung up, my heart still racing. The Blue Note was a jazz bar downtown, dimly lit with a smoky atmosphere, the kind of place you went when you wanted to disappear into the shadows. I made my way there, my mind swirling with thoughts and plans. By the time I arrived, Alyssa was already at the bar, nursing a glass of red wine. She looked up as I approached, her green eyes sharp, assessing. John, she greeted, gesturing to the stool next to her. You look like hell. I gave a bitter laugh as I sat down. You could say that. I've just found out my wife is cheating on me. With your brother. Alyssa didn't flinch. Her face was calm, unreadable. I figured, she said, almost nonchalantly. Brad's been acting weird lately. I knew there was someone new in his life. Didn't know it was your wife, though. I stared at her, trying to gauge her reaction. You don't seem surprised. She shrugged. Brad's always been impulsive. But this? She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. He's playing a dangerous game, and so is your wife. I nodded, feeling a mixture of anger and relief. At least I wasn't alone in this. I don't know what to do, Alyssa. I need your help. She smiled slightly, a glint of something dangerous in her eyes. Oh, I think I can help you. But first, we need to figure out what you want. Revenge, justice, or just a clean break? I took a deep breath, considering her words. I knew what I wanted. I want to make sure she doesn't walk away from this without consequences. I want to protect what's mine, and I want her to know she can't play me for a fool. Alyssa nodded, her smile widening. Good. Then we're on the same page. I've got some ideas, but it won't be pretty. I don't care, I replied, my voice firm. Whatever it takes. She raised her glass in a mock toast. All right then, partner in crime. Let's get started. We spent the next hour hatching a plan. Alyssa knew her brother better than anyone, and she had no love lost for him. She'd been burned by him before, and she had no problem helping me expose Gloria's betrayal. She had access to Brad's schedule, his contacts, and more importantly, she had dirt. A lot of it. It seemed her brother had more than a few skeletons in his closet, and she was more than happy to open the door wide. As she talked, I felt a strange kind of energy building inside me, a dark determination that I hadn't felt in years. I'd been wronged, betrayed, but now I had a chance to turn the tables. Alyssa was right. This wouldn't be pretty. But then again, betrayal never is. As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just going to roll over and let this happen. I was going to take control of my life, my marriage, my future. Gloria and Brad had no idea what was coming their way. Over the next few days, Alyssa and I worked like a well-oiled machine, setting things into motion. She was a force of nature, relentless and precise, just what I needed to keep my head clear. Each conversation with her sharpened my focus, stripping away the fog of anger and betrayal, leaving only cold, hard determination. She seemed to know exactly which buttons to push, exactly what to say to keep me on the edge. We met mostly in dimly lit places, back corners of coffee shops, quiet parks, anywhere we could speak without prying eyes. Our conversations were full of whispered plans and strategic plotting. I learned quickly that Alyssa was as ruthless as her brother, maybe even more so, but with a key difference. She knew exactly where Brad's weaknesses lay. First, we need to find out how deep this goes, she said one afternoon, a sly smile playing on her lips. If Brad's serious about your wife, he'll have made some moves. Expensive dinners, gifts, maybe even trips. We follow the money, and we'll find everything we need. I nodded, leaning forward. And if we do? We use it, she replied, her eyes glinting. Your wife doesn't just get to walk away from this, not after what she's done. I couldn't agree more. We started with Brad. Alyssa had access to his finances, not directly, but through contacts who owed her favors. She made a few discreet calls, speaking in low tones, her voice carrying a strange mix of menace and charm that seemed to work wonders. Within days, she had a list of recent transactions, hotel reservations, charges to high-end restaurants, jewelry stores. There were even receipts for weekend getaways, charged to one of his credit cards. I felt my stomach turn every time I looked at the details. The dates lined up perfectly with the nights Gloria had her gallery events or late-night classes. It was all there, staring me in the face, mocking me. Alyssa didn't give me time to dwell. This is just the beginning, John, she said firmly. Now we take it to the next level. Surveillance. Surveillance? I echoed, surprised. She grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. Yep, we need hard proof. Photos, videos, something undeniable. I've got a guy who can help. Discreet, reliable, no questions asked. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Do it. Alyssa made the arrangements. Her contact, a man named Rico, was a private investigator who had done some work for her in the past. The kind of guy who kept to himself and got the job done without leaving any trails. We met him a few nights later, in a parking lot behind a seedy diner. Rico was a grizzled man in his late 40s, with a face that looked like it had seen too many rough nights. "You're the guy?" Rico asked, giving me a once-over, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded. "Yeah. Can you do it?" He snorted. "Sure, I've done worse. I'll need a week. Maybe less. Depends on how active they are." I felt a flush of anger at his casual tone, but swallowed it down. "Money's not a problem," I replied. "Good," he grunted, then turned to Alyssa. "You'll get your usual cut." She nodded, and he walked off into the darkness without another word. I turned to her, a bit unsettled. "You trust him?" "As much as I trust anyone," she replied, shrugging. "He's good. He'll get us what we need." Over the next few days, I found it hard to focus on anything else. I went through the motions at work, barely aware of what I was doing. At home, Gloria was her usual self, but I couldn't look at her without feeling the rage simmering just beneath the surface. She still had that fake cheerfulness, the little smile that never quite reached her eyes. Every word out of her mouth sounded like a lie, every gesture like an act. I watched her closely, trying to see any hint of guilt or regret, but she was stone cold, or maybe I was just blind. Rico was fast. Within days, he'd sent us the first batch of photos, Gloria and Brad, hand in hand at a fancy restaurant, sneaking kisses in a dimly lit corner. Another set showed them entering a hotel together, laughing, his arm around her waist like they were on a honeymoon. And then, the pièce de résistance, a series of shots taken through a slightly open window. Brad's apartment, his hands on her, their bodies tangled in a way that left nothing to the imagination. My heart clenched as I looked through them, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. I handed the photos back to Alyssa, my hands shaking. "What now?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Now we wait," she said, a sly smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Let's see what they do next." I nodded, but inside, I was a mess. The images were burned into my brain, a constant reminder of what I'd lost, but they were also fuel for the fire, a fire that was growing stronger, hotter with every passing day. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Waiting was agony. Every day felt like an eternity, each minute a reminder that Gloria was out there with him, while I sat at home pretending everything was normal. I still made her coffee every morning, still kissed her goodbye. She was all smiles and warmth, no sign of guilt or remorse. It was like living in a twisted play where everyone knew their lines but me. Alyssa, on the other hand, was relentless. She checked in with Rico daily, pushing him to dig deeper. She wanted more proof, more dirt, something that could not only expose their affair, but destroy it. It was becoming clear that she had a personal stake in this too, a vendetta against her brother that ran deeper than I first realized. I confronted her about it one evening, over drinks at a quiet bar downtown. "Why are you doing this, really?" I asked, my voice low, barely audible over the soft jazz playing in the background. "I get that you don't like Gloria, but this seems personal." Alyssa sipped her wine, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Brad's not just my brother," she replied after a moment. "He's also a bastard who's ruined more than one life, mine included." I leaned in closer, sensing there was more to the story. "What did he do?" She sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "He screwed me over, literally and figuratively. Used our parents' money to bail himself out of bad investments, leaving me to pick up the pieces. When I needed help, he turned his back, and when I tried to get back on my feet, he made sure to knock me down again. So, yeah, I have a bone to pick." I nodded, understanding now why she was so invested. "I guess we're both looking for a bit of justice then." "Or revenge," she corrected with a wicked smile. "Call it what you want. The important thing is, we get them where it hurts." I agreed, feeling that dark determination settling in again. We had the proof, but we needed to use it strategically. Gloria and Brad had been playing their game in the shadows, hiding behind lies and deceit. It was time to bring them out into the light. That's when Alyssa dropped her bombshell. "We're going to crash their little party," she said, her grin widening. "Brad's hosting a big charity event next week. All his high society friends will be there. Gloria too, no doubt." I felt my pulse quicken. "And what are we going to do?" She leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. "We're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what they've been up to. I have a plan, but you need to be ready for anything. Are you?" I hesitated only for a moment, then nodded. Whatever it takes. Over the next few days, we put the pieces in place. Alyssa reached out to a few contacts, friends, colleagues, people in the know who could help us spread the word, subtly at first. We had to be careful. Brad had influence, and we couldn't afford to tip our hand too early. Meanwhile, Rico continued his surveillance, gathering more evidence, more dirt, each new piece more damning than the last. The night of the charity event arrived. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit Gloria had always liked, a dark blue that she said made me look distinguished. Ironic, I thought, given the situation. I felt a strange sense of calm as I adjusted my tie in the mirror. This was it, the moment of truth. I arrived at the event with Alyssa by my side. She looked stunning in a sleek black dress, her eyes sharp and focused. We were a team, united by betrayal and a shared desire to bring them down. As we entered the ballroom, I scanned the room, looking for Gloria and Brad. It didn't take long to find them. There they were, standing near the center of the room, mingling with the city's elite. Gloria looked radiant in a silver dress, her laughter carrying across the room like the tinkling of glass. Brad was next to her, all smiles and charm, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. I felt a surge of anger but pushed it down, forcing myself to stay calm. Alyssa nudged me, her eyes flicking toward the stage. "Showtime," she murmured. I nodded and followed her lead as she made her way to the front. She had already arranged everything, the AV equipment, the presentation. We had photos, videos, text messages, all set to display on the large screens that flanked the stage. Subtlety was out the window. We were going for the jugular. As the lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. Brad stepped up to the microphone, preparing to deliver some speech about generosity and giving back. I could hardly keep from laughing, but Alyssa was ready. She made her way to the AV booth, and within seconds, the screens flickered to life. There, in front of everyone, the first image appeared. Gloria and Brad in a passionate embrace, caught in a private moment that was anything but private now. Gasps filled the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. More images followed, them entering a hotel, sneaking out in the early morning, the damning text messages flashing across the screen. Gloria's face went white. Brad froze, his mouth hanging open mid-sentence. For a second, the room was dead silent. And then, chaos erupted. People were shouting, phones were flashing, and I saw Gloria's eyes dart around, panicked, searching for me. When she found me, her face twisted into something I'd never seen before, a mix of fear, anger, and something like desperation. Brad tried to shut it down, barking orders at the staff, but it was too late. The damage was done. I saw a few of his business associates turning away, shaking their heads. Alyssa's grin was ear to ear. She gave me a nod, and I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. We'd done it. I walked toward Gloria, slowly, deliberately. She was frantic, grabbing at my arm, her voice shaky. "John, I can explain." I pulled my arm away, looking at her with a calm I didn't feel. "Don't," I said softly. "We're done." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Brad's face, a mask of fury and disbelief. For a moment our eyes met, and I could see the realization sinking in. He knew who had done this, and he knew I wasn't done with him yet. The days that followed felt like the eye of a storm, deceptively calm, but with an undercurrent of chaos. The charity event had done its job, and the fallout was immediate. Gloria tried calling me a dozen times that night, but I ignored everyone. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the house before she even woke up. I needed space, time to think, to plan my next move. I stayed at a hotel across town, not wanting to be anywhere near her or the life we had built together. Alyssa called me the next day, her voice triumphant but steady. "It's working," she said. "Brad's in full damage control mode. His sponsors are dropping him, his business partners are pulling out. The whole thing's blowing up in his face." I felt a grim satisfaction hearing that. Brad deserved every bit of it. He'd stepped into my life, my marriage, and tried to take what wasn't his. Now he was paying the price. But there was still Gloria. I wasn't sure how I felt about her anymore. The betrayal cut deep, and I couldn't see a way forward. I didn't even know if I wanted to. I decided to meet Gloria. I needed to hear what she had to say, to see if there was any shred of truth left in her. We met at a small cafe near the house, the place we used to go on Sunday mornings before everything turned to ash. She looked tired, worn out, her makeup hastily applied, her eyes puffy from crying. "John?" she began, reaching for my hand. I pulled away and she flinched, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Why?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "Why him?" She sighed, looking down at her coffee, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know," she whispered. "It just happened." "That's not good enough," I replied, feeling the anger flare up again. "You don't just accidentally start sleeping with someone, Gloria. Not like this. Not behind my back." Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I was lonely," she confessed, her voice breaking. "You were always so busy, so focused on work. I felt invisible. Brad made me feel seen, wanted. It wasn't supposed to go this far." I shook my head, feeling the sting of her words. "You could have talked to me. You could have said something. Instead, you chose to lie, to cheat." She reached for me again, her fingers trembling. "I'm sorry, John. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't want to lose you." I stared at her, searching for any hint of sincerity, of regret. But all I saw was fear. Fear of losing the comfort, the security, the life we had built. Not real remorse, not for what she had done. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. "You already have," I replied coldly, standing up. "We're done, Gloria. Get a lawyer." Her face crumpled, and she started to sob, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the cafe, the door slamming shut behind me. I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me, a sense of finality. There was no going back now. I had to move forward no matter how hard it would be. Alyssa called me later that day. "How'd it go?" she asked, though I could tell she already knew the answer. "It's over," I said simply. She was silent for a moment, then asked, "And what about Brad?" I felt a smile tug at the corner of my lips. "He's next." We decided to meet again, to discuss our next steps. Alyssa suggested a bar near her place, a quiet spot where we could talk without interruption. When I arrived, she was already there, a glass of whiskey in hand. She smiled when she saw me, a mix of sympathy and determination in her eyes. "You okay?" she asked. "I will be," I replied, taking the seat next to her. "What's the plan?" She leaned in, her voice low. "Brad's on edge. He's trying to figure out who's behind this, but he's got no proof. He's scrambling. Now's the time to hit him where it really hurts." "And where's that?" Alyssa grinned. "His wallet." She explained that Brad's financial situation was more precarious than it appeared. He was leveraged to the hilt, relying on loans and credit to maintain his lifestyle and business. The scandal from the charity event had already caused a few investors to back out, but if we pushed a little harder, we could topple his entire empire. "Rico's been digging deeper," Alyssa continued. "He found out that Brad's been hiding assets overseas, skimming off the top. to keep his creditors at bay. If we leak that information, it'll be the final nail in the coffin. He'll be ruined. I felt a dark thrill at the thought. How do we do it? Leave that to me, she replied, her smile widening. I've got contacts in the right places. I'll make sure it gets out. Over the next few days, we set the final stage of our plan into motion. Alyssa worked her contacts, and I kept my distance from Gloria, refusing to take her calls or respond to her messages. She tried to come to the house once, but I'd already changed the locks. I watched from the window as she banged on the door, tears streaming down her face. It felt like watching a stranger. A few days later, the news broke. Brad's financial misdeeds were splashed across the headlines, every dirty detail laid bare. His investors pulled out en masse, his business partners severing ties. Within hours, his empire began to crumble. Alyssa and I watched it unfold from a distance, our phones buzzing with updates. "We did it," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "We actually did it." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. I had won, but at what cost? My marriage was in shambles, my life upended, but I was free, free from the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. "Where do we go from here?" I asked quietly. Alyssa looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Wherever we want," she said softly, her hand reaching out to touch mine. "We start over, together, if you're up for it." I felt a spark, a flicker of something new, something unexpected. "Yeah," I replied slowly, a small smile forming. "Maybe we do." Starting over was easier said than done. The aftermath of our plan had left a trail of chaos that I was still trying to navigate. Gloria kept trying to reach me, desperate for a chance to explain, to plead, to beg. I blocked her number, sent a formal letter through my lawyer, and filed for divorce. Every step felt like cutting a tether, freeing myself from the sinking ship that was our marriage. But it was more complicated than that. There were days when the old memories crept in, the early days when we were happy, when everything seemed possible. I hated those moments the most. They made me doubt myself, doubt the decisions I had made, the path I had chosen. Alyssa, on the other hand, seemed invigorated. With Brad's empire collapsing, she was almost buoyant. She called me every day, her voice bright and full of energy. She seemed to know exactly what I needed, often before I did. One day she called and said, "John, you need to get out of that hotel. Come stay at my place for a while. You need a change of scenery." I hesitated at first. It felt too soon, too sudden. But Alyssa was persuasive, and part of me craved the change, craved the feeling of moving forward. So, I packed my things and drove over to her place. Her apartment was cozy, a small but stylish loft in a converted warehouse with large windows that let in a flood of light. It was a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive mood that had settled over me in the hotel room. "Make yourself at home," she said with a smile when I walked in. "I've got an extra room, and no, you don't have to pay rent." I laughed, the sound feeling strange and foreign in my throat. "Thanks," I replied. "I appreciate it." Over the next few days, a new routine developed. Alyssa worked during the day, and I found myself drifting through the city, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. I started going to the gym again, trying to burn off the anger, the frustration. I went for long walks, exploring neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years, trying to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage, outside of everything that had happened. Alyssa was always there when I got back, a glass of wine in hand, ready to talk or just listen. She was like a beacon in the darkness, guiding me towards something new, something better. I found myself looking forward to those evenings more and more. The way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about her plans, her dreams. One night, after too much wine, we found ourselves on her balcony, overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, and I could hear the distant sounds of traffic below, a soft hum that filled the silence between us. She turned to me, her face soft in the moonlight. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I took a deep breath, considering her question. "I think we did what we had to do," I replied. "I don't know if it was right, but it was necessary." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I guess that's enough for now." We stood there in silence for a while longer, and then she surprised me by reaching out and taking my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady, a lifeline in the chaos. I turned to face her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The days turned into weeks, and Alyssa and I grew closer. We talked about everything: our childhoods, our past relationships, our hopes and fears. She had a way of making me feel seen, understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was intoxicating. I found myself drawn to her, her strength, her resilience, the way she took on the world without apology. But then, just as things were starting to settle, the ghosts of my past came knocking. One afternoon, while I was out running errands, I got a call from my lawyer. "John, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "Gloria is contesting the divorce. She's claiming infidelity on your part." "What?" I nearly shouted into the phone, my pulse quickening. "That's insane. She's the one who cheated." "I know," he replied calmly. "But she's got a statement from someone who claims you've been in a relationship with another woman for months, Alyssa." I felt my stomach drop, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. "That's a lie," I snapped. "Alyssa and we only started seeing each other after everything happened." "She's playing dirty, John," my lawyer continued. "She's trying to paint you as the bad guy, to get a more favorable settlement. We'll fight it, but it's going to get messy." I hung up, feeling the rage boiling inside me again. Gloria was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to twist the knife. I drove back to Alyssa's place, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. When I got there, I found her in the living room, her face pale, her eyes wide. "What's wrong?" she asked, immediately sensing my mood. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Gloria," I said simply. "She's coming after us. She's claiming we were having an affair before I filed for divorce." Alyssa's eyes narrowed, and I saw a flash of anger cross her face. "That bitch," she muttered. "She's trying to take you down with her." I nodded. "She's desperate. She knows she's lost, but she's not going down without a fight." Alyssa was quiet for a moment, then her expression hardened. "Let her come. We've got more than enough to prove she's the one who was unfaithful. Let her dig her own grave." But even as she said it, I could see the concern in her eyes. This was far from over, and Gloria was proving to be more formidable than I had anticipated. I took a deep breath, my mind sharpening with a new resolve. "Maybe it's time to stop playing defense," I said, a plan forming in my head. "Maybe it's time to go on the attack." Alyssa smiled, that familiar spark of mischief back in her eyes. "I like the sound of that," she replied. "Let's make sure Gloria gets exactly what she deserves." If Gloria wanted a war, she was going to get one. I'd spent too long letting her take the upper hand, letting her dictate the terms. But that was over now. I was done playing nice. I was ready to fight, to strike back with everything I had. Alyssa and I sat down that night and began to plan. We knew that Gloria's strategy was to paint me as the villain, to drag my name through the mud, to get a better settlement. But we had an advantage: the truth and the mountain of evidence against her. "We need to flip the narrative," Alyssa said, her eyes focused, her voice steady. "She's trying to paint herself as the victim. We need to show the world who the real Gloria is." "How?" I asked, leaning forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "We've got the photos, the messages." "But she's not stupid. She'll claim they're doctored or taken out of context. She's got a way of twisting things, making them work for her. Alyssa nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. We're not going to let her twist anything. We'll go public first, control the story before she gets the chance. What do you mean, go public? She leaned back, her eyes sparkling with a dangerous kind of excitement. A press release. We leak the photos, the evidence, everything, to a few choice outlets. We make sure the story breaks on our terms. Gloria has a lot of friends in the art community, but she's also made enemies. A scandal like this, it'll stick. I hesitated, the thought of airing my dirty laundry in public making my stomach churn. Isn't there another way? Alyssa reached out, taking my hand, her grip firm. John, this is the only way to protect yourself. If you wait, she'll control the story, and you'll be on the defensive the entire time. Trust me. I looked into her eyes and saw nothing but determination. She was right. If I wanted to come out of this with any shred of dignity, I needed to be proactive. I needed to fight back. All right, I said finally. Let's do it. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. Alyssa worked her contacts, reaching out to journalists, bloggers, anyone who would listen. I stayed in the background, trying to keep a low profile, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. But I knew it had to be done. The story broke on a Thursday morning. I remember waking up to a dozen missed calls, my phone buzzing, incessantly with notifications. Alyssa was at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, her laptop open in front of her. It's everywhere, she said with a grin. Every major outlet is picking it up. I sat down next to her and glanced at the screen. There it was. My life, my marriage, splashed across headlines for the world to see. Wife of prominent financial analyst caught in scandalous affair, read one. Another. Inside the secret double life of Gloria and her lover. My stomach twisted, but there was a strange sense of relief, too. It was out there now, all of it. No more secrets, no more lies. Gloria's reaction was immediate. Within hours, she had released a statement denying everything, claiming it was a smear campaign, that the evidence was fabricated, that I was trying to ruin her reputation out of spite. But it was too late. The photos, the texts, the videos, they were all too damning. Her denials only made her look desperate, and soon enough, the tide started to turn. People began digging into her past, finding stories of affairs, of whispered rumors about her relationships with her students and gallery owners. Her art community friends started to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. And just like that, Gloria's carefully curated life began to crumble. But it wasn't over. Gloria wasn't going to go down quietly. She hired a new lawyer, a shark with a reputation for being ruthless. The legal proceedings escalated, becoming more vicious with each passing day. She was contesting the divorce, demanding a larger share of the assets, claiming emotional distress. It was clear she wanted to drag me through the mud, to bleed me dry, both financially and emotionally. Alyssa and I continued to strategize, preparing for every angle Gloria might take. My lawyer advised me to stay calm, to avoid any public confrontation, but it was getting harder with each day. Gloria knew how to push my buttons, how to twist the knife. She began reaching out to my friends, my colleagues, trying to sway them, to paint me as the unfaithful husband, the one who'd driven her to infidelity. I was done with it all. We need something bigger, I said one evening, pacing back and forth in Alyssa's living room. Something that'll shut her down once and for all. Alyssa watched me, her eyes thoughtful. I might have an idea, she said slowly, but it's risky. I stopped, turning to face her. What is it? She took a deep breath. Gloria's been hiding money. She has a few accounts overseas like Brad did. I've got a contact who can dig into it, but it'll take time and it's not exactly legal. I stared at her, the implications sinking in. And if we get caught? She shrugged. We won't. Not if we're careful. But if we find something, it could destroy her. Her claim to a larger settlement would be dead in the water, and she might even face charges. I hesitated, my mind racing. It was a dangerous move, but we were running out of options. Gloria was relentless, and I couldn't keep fighting her like this forever. Do it, I said finally. Find out what you can. Alyssa nodded, pulling out her phone and making the call. I watched her, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. This was it, the final play. If we pulled it off, Gloria would be finished. If not, things could get a whole lot worse. A few days later, Alyssa's contact came through. Gloria had been hiding money, a lot of it. Several accounts under different names, all linked back to her. It was enough to blow her case out of the water, to show the court exactly who she was. We took the information to my lawyer, and he smiled for the first time in weeks. This changes everything, he said. We've got her. The next day, we filed the new evidence with the court, and Gloria's lawyer was forced to back down. She was cornered, her options dwindling. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. But I knew Gloria wasn't done. Not yet. She was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. I thought the worst was behind me. The courtroom victory had felt like the last chapter in a long, exhausting battle. Gloria's attempt to get the evidence dismissed had failed, and she was out of legal maneuvers. The divorce settlement was moving forward in my favor. I finally felt like I could breathe again, like I could move on. But life, it seems, had one more surprise waiting for me. And it wasn't a pleasant one. A few days after the hearing, I was at my new apartment, packing the last of my things from the old house when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. John. A voice on the other end was tight, almost frantic. This is Dr. Patel from County General. Your wife, Gloria. She's here in the emergency room. It's bad. You need to come right away. My heart stopped. What happened? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She was in an accident, he continued. A serious one. We're doing everything we can, but it doesn't look good. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the anger, I never wanted this. I never wanted her to be hurt. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, my mind spinning. When I arrived at the hospital, I was met by a nurse who led me down a long, sterile hallway. Every step felt heavy, like I was moving through quicksand. She pulled me into a small waiting room and asked me to sit. What happened? I demanded, my voice shaky. The nurse's face was somber. She was driving recklessly, she said. Hit a divider at high speed. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt. We think she may have been under the influence. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. Gloria, reckless? Under the influence? That didn't sound like her, not at all. Then again, everything about her behavior had been erratic lately. She had been spiraling ever since the courtroom defeat, and I knew the divorce had hit her hard, but I never imagined it would come to this. How bad is it? I asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. The nurse hesitated, then sighed. She's in critical condition, John. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. The doctors are doing everything they can, but you should prepare for the worst. I nodded numbly, my mind trying to catch up with what was happening. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the walls, at the floor, replaying the past few months over and over in my head. How did we get here? How did it come to this? Finally, the doctor came in, his face grim. We've done everything we can, he said softly. But Gloria's injuries are extensive. She's unconscious, and we're not sure if she'll wake up. Even if she does, there's a chance she may not fully recover. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt dizzy, the room spinning around me. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. We were supposed to part ways, move on, start new lives separately. Not this. Not this sudden, violent turn. I asked if I could see her, and the doctor nodded, leading me down another hallway to her room. When I walked in, I hardly recognized her. She was pale, tubes running from her mouth, her face bruised and swollen. Her once vibrant hair was matted, and there was a deep cut across her forehead. I stood there, staring at her, a torrent of emotions rushing through me. Anger, sadness, guilt, and a strange, unexpected tenderness. I took a deep breath and sat down beside her, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "Gloria," I whispered, "why did you do this?" Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, the machines around her beeping rhythmically. I waited for an answer that I knew wouldn't come. The room was silent except for the hum of the equipment, the steady ticking of a clock on the wall, each second dragging into the next. And then, a memory came flooding back, one of the early days when we first met. We were young, so full of life and dreams. I remembered the way she laughed, the way she made me feel like anything was possible. For a moment, I saw her as she was back then, before the lies, before the betrayal, before everything fell apart. I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't know if I still loved her, but seeing her like this, so fragile and broken, I knew I didn't want this to be the end of her story. Despite everything, I didn't want her to go out like this, alone, in pain, filled with regret. Alyssa arrived at the hospital later that day, and I could see the shock on her face when she saw me there. She walked over, putting a comforting hand on my shoulder. "John, I'm so sorry," she whispered. I nodded, my eyes still on Gloria. "I don't know what to feel," I confessed. "I don't know if I should be angry or sad." Alyssa squeezed my shoulder gently. "You're human," she said softly. "It's okay to feel everything, even if it doesn't make sense." The days that followed were a blur. Gloria remained in a coma, and the doctors were unsure if she would wake up. I found myself visiting her room more often than I expected, sitting by her bedside, talking to her, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. I talked about the past, about our good times, about what went wrong. I talked until I had nothing left to say. I knew that I needed to move on, that my life couldn't be put on hold forever. But I also knew that something inside me had shifted. The anger I had felt for so long was fading, replaced by a strange kind of peace. Gloria had made her choices, and so had I. But whatever happened next, I knew that I would be okay. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the hospital. Gloria had woken up. She was weak, disoriented, but alive. I didn't know what that meant for us, for our future. I only knew that we were both still here, and somehow we had both survived. When I walked into her room that last time, she turned to me, her eyes filled with confusion, pain, and something else, maybe a hint of regret. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, but no words came out. I stood there, unsure of what to say, unsure of what I even wanted to say. Finally, I spoke. "I'm glad you're alive, Gloria," I whispered. "I really am." She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew that I had been given a second chance, a chance to let go, to heal, to move on, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As I left the hospital that day, I looked up at the sky, feeling the cool breeze against my face, the sun breaking through the clouds. It wasn't the ending I had expected, but maybe that was okay. Maybe this was just the beginning of something new. I walked away, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I was free, truly free. The end.